I'm Randall Sumpter. I'm an associate professor of communication at Texas A&M University, and I got my PhD from UT Austin. My primary interest is in how journalists learned to do their work at the end of the 19th century. At the end of the 19th century, the number of daily newspapers in this country doubles. There's this huge demand for the latest press technology. But there are no journalism schools for people to learn how to do journalism. So my research looks at how knowledge brokers spread how to do journalism, what to do as a journalist at the end of the 19th century. I can remember when I decided to get into journalism. It was in high school. I was working on the student newspaper. I really enjoyed it. And I'm a very, very curious person. And I like to learn new things and find new things. And journalism just worked for me. It just met those priorities for me. This may be a disappointing answer, but it never occurred to me that I would change the world as a journalist. What occurred to me was that I would know first what was happening. And so I didn't get in it to be a reformer. I got in it to be someone who knew what was going on. I can remember the moment when I decided to go get my PhD. I was sitting in the city room of the Daytona Beach News Journal, and I was correcting copy, story after story after story. And finally, I just said to myself one day, why not go get a PhD and teach this on the university level? Maybe you could make a difference then. There are three questions I concentrate on. Well, one of the questions is, how do people learn to be journalists at the end of the 19th century when there aren't journalism schools? Another question is, when does journalism become a profession rather than a trade? And that happens towards the end of the 19th century. And then finally, I'm really curious about what we would call knowledge brokers, people who seem to circulate throughout the industry, getting new jobs, different jobs, but spreading what they knew when they did it. I think one of the fascinating things about the comparison between media today and media 100 years ago, when the really only mass medium was a large daily newspaper, is how messages proliferate with technology. You can see it happen in newsrooms in the late 19th century. You can see the day that people got typewriters. Typewriters made it possible for them to compose many more messages much more quickly. And typewriters were sort of their social media, or their social medium. They would just put out vast quantities of stuff that they would have to write by hand before. To be a competent journalist in the late 19th century before typewriters, you had to be able to write 1,000 words an hour by hand. That's an incredible hill to climb. But with a typewriter, it becomes very, very easy to do, much easier to do. So what do you do with that spare time? Well, you compose more messages. And eventually, newspapers are going to grow. They're going to grow from 4- and 8-page newspapers in 1875 to 28 to 36-page newspapers. And some Sunday editions of large daily newspapers in New York City are going to be 100 pages. And it's all made possible by the fact that, voila, a typewriter. You know, I see a lot of connections between what happened at the end of the 19th century and what's happening now in journalism. Journalism today is remaking itself. The technology is different. The questions that people ask are different. How they answer them is different. And we have this brand new thing called citizen journalism, where you recruit people in the community to help you report stories. So there's a lot of interesting things happening both theoretically and practically in journalism that attract me. When my students leave my classroom, especially the history classroom, I want them to be able to more critically assess messages that they run into in the world. I want them to be better media consumers. And since they have all this new technology, I want them to be better message producers. To communicate is actually a very complex task. And I want them to learn maybe some things about how to communicate in my history classroom.